Welcome back to the Manchester Evening News, Manchester United fans. The signing of Mount is now confirmed, but I wanted to have a look at what he can bring to Manchester United, as well as what sort of he's been signed for in the first place, what his strengths are, and how well he's going to fit in the red shirt of Manchester United. But without further ado, let's get straight into it. What Man United have gained in Mason Mount is an extremely versatile midfielder. He can play a wide range of roles. He can play as a number 8, he can play as a number 10. He's played off the right for Chelsea this season. He can play as sort of inside forward. He can play sort of second striker. He's a really versatile player, and he's English, obviously, which is always helpful for the homegrown quota that Manchester United have to hit if they're going to get into the European competitions every year. But I think this is seriously a fantastic signing. You look at some of the other transfer fees going around for players who also play similar positions. You look at Liverpool's signing of Dominik Szoboszlai, and I'm looking at that thinking that is a astronomical amount of money for a player who's not as good as Mount. Like, they've paid, I think it's rumoured 70 million, which was his release clause from Red Bull Leipzig, and he's not as good as Mount. He's not as talented as Mount. He's definitely not as versatile as Mount. They are different players, but they do play very similar positions. They have different strengths. I mean, I've got Mount's stats up here, and some of his strengths are just exactly what Erik ten Hag needs in a midfield. They're what he sort of relied on at Ajax, this sort of technical, gifted, solid in the press. I mean, I'm looking here, passes, progressive passes. I mean, defensively, fantastic, especially from an attacking midfielder. And passes are great. His dribbling's not quite on the level you'd want it to be if he was going to do them sort of progressing the ball up towards the attack. But he is definitely a more rounded player than Christian Eriksen, who was probably the role he's going to play. But we did see Bruno Fernandes drop into that Christian Eriksen role a couple of times last season, especially when Marcel Sabitzer was playing alongside him. And Bruno Fernandes did a really good job there. Maybe we could see Mount take that number 10 role and Bruno Fernandes drop into that number 8, sort of more alongside Casemiro. I mean, Casemiro will be that holding defensive midfielder for pretty much the entire season, unless Manchester United do go and get someone like Romeo Lavia or Sofian Amrabat from Fiorentina. But I do think the signing of Mount really has these layers to it that can't really be replicated by another signing. There's not really anybody else out there apart from sort of Jude Bellingham, who's already gone to Real Madrid. I'm looking at there's really not that many players out there who can play this sort of role that's sort of a hybrid between an 8 and a 10. He's not quite an attacking midfielder, he's not quite a box-to-box midfielder, and that versatility, I think, is why Erik ten Hag has gone so heavily for him. He only had a year left on his contract, and a fee that could be 60 million is 55 million, even split over his 5-year contract. I do think the versatility there is brilliant, and I am a massive fan of Mason Mount. Last season he did play 35 times in a Chelsea shirt, registering 3 goals and 6 assists in all competitions. That is only 2,188 minutes in all comps though, so he wasn't really playing as regularly as you'd sort of expected him to. Later on in the season, he did have a couple of injuries, pelvis injuries mainly. He's much more regular than Christian Eriksen. Christian Eriksen, towards the end of last season, you know my thoughts if you've been watching this channel for a long time. You know my thoughts on Christian Eriksen, and towards the end of last season, he's clearly got that quality. He just hasn't got the fitness anymore. He hasn't got this sort of consistency that I think Mount will bring, either in that number 10 or in that number 8 role. And I think it means that we'll get the best out of Bruno Fernandes in a defensive capacity as well. I think Mount's defensive work plus Bruno's defensive work probably equals out. And if one of them can then drift a bit further forward and support the attack and create that overload, especially if Manchester United don't get one of these first choice strikers this season, what he can bring is more than what Christian Eriksen could bring, especially towards the end of last season. Start of last season, Christian Eriksen, I must say, was fantastic. Towards the end, he sort of lost that energy that was sort of needed towards the end of the season, and we started seeing Fred and McTominay and Sabitzer a lot more. Ten Hag does know Mason Mount from his time at Vitesse Arnhem in the Eredivisie. Mason Mount was apparently impressive to Ten Hag back then. We've covered that on the Manchester Evening News. But I do think Mason Mount is he's fitting in with what Erik ten Hag wants to build Manchester United into, and I think that's really where the positives come from. But Manchester United fans, let me know what you think of the Mason Mount signing down in the comments. I think it's a fantastic signing. Let me know if you agree with me. Make sure to check us out on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. We're now on there. Check out the Manchester is Red podcast, where our writers went a bit more into detail about what Mason Mount could bring to Manchester United. And I'll speak to you next time.